Welcome everybody. I'm glad you could make it. It's really great to see you all again. I'm continually reminded on how this pandemic just, reduced human contact and made a lot of people depressed and anxious and all. So the vaccine can come soon enough. So welcome to the Texas Church of Freethought. In case you were wondering, it is October 11th. We're going to talk about Freethought Day and what it means. And for anybody who's a newcomer, I don't see any newcomers online with us today, but any people who stroll in and see this YouTube later, yeah, we are a church of people who reject superstition, and really we reject all things supernatural. Ours is a religion of facts and reason. The challenge being not that we make sense of the incoherent notions of gods, devils, angels, souls, and bodiless, brainless existence, but of the broad challenges of the personal human experience. In other words, the fact can be that I liked my eggs this morning, and really just to try to make sense of the human condition generally, as opposed to the world of science. So there is a difference, and we've talked about that before, especially last time, I think. Well, Halloween comes at the end of this month. It seems the pandemic may well prevent children from trick-or-treating, but we will see the usual displays of ghosts, ghouls, skeletons, vampires, werewolves, and witches. And Halloween is only the kickoff of the winter holiday season that continues with Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. And when some additional things like Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Festivus, many of us will observe and call it solstice, which is where the holiday season all came from. But before all of those holidays, tomorrow, in fact, comes Freethought Day. Freethought Day is October 12th. That date happens to be the day on which, in 1492, Christopher Columbus' first expedition made landfall on the island in the Bahamas that he named San Salvador. Some mark it as the European discovery, perhaps the rediscovery of the Americas. Recently, it has begun to be marked as Indigenous Peoples Day, as it is the date on which the peoples of the Western Hemisphere first discovered the arrival on their shores of Europeans, who would also eventually bring wheat, coffee, bananas, sugarcane, cattle, sheep, horses, as well as smallpox, measles, mumps, typhus, and guns. People of the Western Hemisphere were also from that time entered to strange beliefs and practices called Christianity, and with that, enslavement and the eventual importation of African slaves beginning a decade later in 1502. That was the year that a Spanish guy brought over his African slaves. Where did you ever get the idea that it was 1619? By the way, whoever's got their microphone on, turn that off so you can sneeze and crinkle your plastic all you want with it coming into the sound of the presentation. So Freethought Day is connected with events 200 years after 1592 that happened in New England. In late January of that year, 1692, Betty Paris, age 9, daughter of Samuel Paris, the minister of Salem Village, not to be confused with Salem Town, so there are two Salems. Now there's only one today because Salem Village, where this all happened, became the city of town of Danvers, Massachusetts. So this, Betty Paris and her and Abigail Williams, who's the minister's niece, they began having quote unquote fits. They threw things, they screamed, they crawled under furniture, and they contorted themselves, as it was said then, quote, beyond natural disease, unquote. They said they were being bitten, pinched, and stuck with pins. So of course, that just had to be a demonic attack by witchcraft. Two other girls soon joined in the attempt, 12-year-old Ann Putnam and 17-year-old Elizabeth Hubbard, who obviously is the oldest one, kind of took leadership. They all claimed to be under attack by infernal powers. Pressed, the girls named Tituba, the Barbadian slave of Samuel Paris, as well as Sarah Good, a poor and then pregnant woman, whom even her husband he suspected of witchcraft, and a lady named Sarah Osborne, who attended church services only rarely, and she had married her servant after her first husband died. And she did that possibly was suspected to keep her sons from her first marriage from acquiring the family farm. Tituba, after being beaten by her master, confessed and implicated Good and Osborne, both of whom denied the accusations. It didn't take long for more of the what came to be called the afflicted, the girls, to make accusations. And by the way, later there were young men also, who joined the afflicted. Arrests followed, and then the famous trials were convened on June 2nd by a special panel. Judges at these proceedings, prominent men in Massachusetts, accepted as fact, quote, "structural evidence," unquote, the accuser's accounts of such things as seeing the devil consort with the accused that no one else could see. Right there in the courtroom, I see the devil there whispering in the ear. And the judges accepted this as fact. The accused would produce pins, they said, it supernaturally appeared, and poked them. On one occasion, an accuser was caught late in the lie. She produced a piece of a knife and said, "This just appeared out of nowhere supernaturally and was trying to stab me." And one of the other members in the audience held up the other piece of the knife and said, "No, that's not true. Look, I got the knife. It broke on me just a minute, just earlier." And what did the judge do? Throw the accuser out? No. She was caught in a blatant lie, and the judge just admonished her and said not to exaggerate. Also employed was the water test, seeing if an accused witch would float or sink when thrown into water. Touch test, that was to see if an afflicted person would stop having their fit upon being touched by the accused. They also looked for skin blemishes. You see the upper right there, which they called the devil's teat, little tiny pimples, marks, sometimes just birthmarks, and also points on the body without sensation. They used witch cakes, which were confections. They're not like that. That's a witch cake. That's a fun cake there at the lower left. But witch cakes using urine from the alleged witch, and then they would feed that to the dog. And if the dog reacted, then, well, that was a witch, all right. Most important, those who refused to confess were condemned to death, while those who confessed and named other witches, those who cooperated, were not. Gosh, we've just never heard that before, where if you cooperate with the authorities, they let you off easy. You see, the authorities, the Puritans, they didn't want to kill anyone. They just wanted guilty witches to confess and repent and renounce the pact they had made with the devil. What would you have done if you had been one of the accused placed in that situation? The hangings began on June 10th. Sarah Good was hanged on July 19th. Sarah Osborne, the other initial accused, had already died in prison back on May 10th. None of the witches were burned, by the way. One accused, 81-year-old Giles Corey, was tortured to death for refusing to plead. They laid him down, put a board on him, and began piling stones on it. That's in the lower picture. They just kept piling up those stones for days. He never did plead. His last words after days of this were, quote, "more weight," unquote. Not that he was any big hero. He had testified against his own wife, Martha, and she was among those hanged 3 days later on September 22nd. One of those hanged on August 19th was George Burroughs, the former minister of Salem Village, who moved what is now Maine after he was paid and had to borrow money that he could not repay from one of the principals in Salem Village, Proctor, John Proctor, I believe it was. Burroughs recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly on the gallows, something believed to be impossible for a witch to do. With the Reverend Cotton Mather's enthusiastic approval, though, Burroughs was hanged anyway. What would Burroughs have said or done, I wonder, if their positions had been reversed, if it had been Cotton Mather on the scaffold and Burroughs witnessing the Lord's Prayer being recited without defect. There are so many interesting, unnerving, and heartbreaking aspects to these and related events of 1692 context then. The idea that ergot poisoning played some role is almost wrong. Not only did the symptoms not fit, they seemed to appear and disappear too abruptly to be physiological. That psychological, sociological, and even political factors were important, though that seems certain. While the documentation is by no means complete, there's quite a bit that gives a good picture of what's going on. One of the witches hanged on September 22nd, one Mary Easty, wrote a letter to the judges that we still have. And that letter is just absolutely pitiful to read and at the same time arrestingly insightful. She said, and as part of her message, I would humbly beg of you, your honors would be pleased to examine these afflicted persons strictly and keep them apart sometime. And likewise, to try some of these confessing witches by being confident that several of them has belied themselves and others. You'll see an alteration of these things, they say, myself and others having made a league with the devil. Of course, she was ignored. Another interesting fact is that another of the witches who were hanged was someone named Martha Carrier. You see a memorial stone on the left there. Does the surname Carrier, that guy on the right, his last name is Carrier, does that make you think of anything? Well, Martha was the great, 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 great grandmother, that's 5 greats, of the guy on the right, whose name was Willis Haviland Carrier, the 20th century inventor of air conditioning. There he is with one of the early air conditioners. When we get done with pulling down the statues of Confederate general leaders, I think a very large monument to Willis Haviland Carrier should be erected somewhere in Florida or South Texas. The New England witch hysteria, 1692, or the Salem witch trials as they're popularly known. Historians call it the New England witch hysteria because it was more than just a Salem village, now known as Danvers, Massachusetts. Many works of literature, art, and we've seen some of them just now, the pictures I've put up, as well as drama and film have been inspired by the events of that time. There are videos on YouTube about it, some quite short, many that get a few facts wrong, but little attention is usually paid to what finally ended the episode. Do you know what finally stopped it? 128 years ago today, a total of 9 people had been hanged for a crime that is no longer recognized in the civilized world. Of course, witchcraft elsewhere in the world is, as they say, a whole nother subject. Of course, there was also Giles Corey, who died under torture, and others, including Sarah Osborne and 3 others who died while imprisoned. But by October 11th, by this date, 328 years ago, the jails were full of hundreds of people, and the accusations were still growing in a grotesque orgy of fear. One of the judges had already resigned and been replaced. Even the Reverend Increase Mather, Cotton's father, had come out against quote-unquote spectral evidence. On the next day, October 12th, tomorrow, the colony's governor, one William Phipps, whose own wife had been mentioned as a possible witch, maybe that was what lit a fire under him, he wrote the Privy Council of the British monarchs at the time, William and Mary, and that also figures into the episode. They were just recently installed. Remember, this was soon after regicide of one of the previous kings. He wrote the Privy Council saying, in a longer letter, this excerpt, but as soon as I came from fighting against Her Majesty's enemies, and he's talking about his duties out with trying to put down Indian attacks, and understood what danger some of their innocent subjects might be exposed to, the evidence of the afflicted persons only did prevail. He's talking about spectral evidence. Either to the committing or trying of any of them, I did before any application was made unto about it. See, it was all his idea. Nobody else had any. He put a stop to the proceedings of the court, and there stopped till their majesty's pleasure be known. The letter is rather pitiful in expressing his fears that my enemies are seeking to turn it all upon me, as elsewhere in the letter, but it includes the key observation that Phipps realized that what's highlighted there, what danger some of their subjects might expose to if the evidence of the afflicted persons only did prevail. It was this key recognition that is why today courts of law in the U.S. do not accept spectral evidence, nor do defendants, unless they are pleading insanity, offer the excuse that the devil made me do it, or even God commanded me to do it. And we all know the Old Testament has that going on before atrocities. So this is why October 12th, besides being Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day, there's no reason it can't be all of those things. That's why it's celebrated as Freethought Day by religious skeptics, rationalists, humanists, atheists, and agnostics. So enjoy the new world of Freethought today, tomorrow, and every day. In a very important sense, we are not a Christian nation. At least we are no longer the Christian nation that our 17th century ancestors lived in. And here's others pointing out he did not approve of spectral evidence. This is also a recognition of another principle of jurisprudence we have, that rather let guilty people free than convict innocent people. So at the same time that we mark an important event or recognize a special person, there is a danger of obscuring the context and the complexities involved that can be critical to making sense of it. The use of special evidence, for example, did entirely end on October 12th of 1692, but when the trials in New England started up again, that sort of evidence was discounted and no more convictions or executions occurred. In fact, there were no more executions for witchcraft after 1692 in what would become the United States. There were a few trials that ended in acquittal, but after the middle of the 18th century, the laws against witchcraft kind of just disappeared from the law books. The last person to be executed for witchcraft in Britain was Janet Horne. It's not certain if that was her real name. That was in 1727, 9 years before the witchcraft laws in Scotland were repealed. The other hazard of special days is that not only does it kind of obscure this special event that we're trying to call attention to, but with other days like Darwin days, I don't know, if Darwin once picked his nose in public, then people are going to say, see, he wasn't somebody worth honoring, and so on and so forth. With this holiday of Freethought Day, the really interesting is that none of the people would be considered admirable today. Even the people objected, even Increase Mather, the guy was a dyed-in-the-wool, fundamentalist, crazy person. They lived in an entirely different world. They did take naturalism for granted. It's just that they realized, they had this key realization that spectral evidence was just not predictable, could not be relied on in a court of law to really be the truth. So they put the truth ahead of the spectral evidence, and that was a great step forward. That's why we recognize Freethought Day. All of our ancestors were not sterling examples of humanity, but they did the right things that finally, step by step, got us to where we are today. So that's why tomorrow's a special. So I invite you to take what you've learned about this and share it with your family, your friends, coworkers, neighbors, and even random strangers. It's a sad thing that many of us cannot be open about our views on religion, but it's clearly not necessary to be quote unquote out to this. Believers need to be reminded about what quote good Christians unquote did less than 400 years ago, not just because it was olden days when people know better, but because people took their religious doctrine seriously then. All the reasons that they had for allowing spectral evidence and believing in what they believe now still exist. They're still in that Bible. That's what they were going on. But curiously, a 2009 poll of 1,871 described Christians found that 40% of them strongly agreed that the devil, quote, is not a living being, it was just a symbol of evil. Of course, all of them had to believe in God, but only 40% of them believed in the devil. That's another little baby step there. Something that is to be encouraged. One more thing, we're going to show this video a little later, right before we go to discussion, because it helps to put the witchcraft business in a broader context as one more thing that Europe has brought with them to the Americas. It also shows that the idea of hunting, killing witches, commanded in the Bible at Exodus 22:18, has been very part of Christianity up until very recently. Even though Christians today would readily say that people who do that are, quote, not real Christians, unquote. Just like they say that people who would enslave others are, quote, not real Christians, and people who hate black people are, quote, not real Christians. I hasten to add that this is about hating on Christianity, for they could easily deal with their sordid past by just admitting that religion should be something that is subject to doubt, criticism, and improvement, just like anything else in life, that religion like all human understanding, is a process of trial and error and not an absolute set of doctrines and dogmas. That is certainly our take on religion. That is a process of trial and error of what you're trying to do. In our case, we say making sense of the human condition from a subjective side. It would really help too if people would come to appreciate that there simply is no evidence for it, so no reasonable place, no point, no purpose, and no use for supernaturalism. We'll show this video in a bit, and those watching this later can go there to see it. I have it here, so we'll put it up on the screen after the presentation ends. We don't infringe any copyright restrictions. So what do you think? I'm going to be very curious to know when we get into the discussion portion. And then just some housekeeping things. First of all, if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe, hit the bell or the like button, and let it be known that you were here and liked it. Reminder of our principles. Here's our doctrines and dogmas. Just things to do, reason. Of course, it's a noun and a verb. Learn it and then live by it. Use it. Enjoy ourselves and each other in this world we find ourselves in. Appreciate what we have and find all the things that are to find that meaning and purpose, just all really synonyms for love. We have love, those things that matter to us. Just a reminder on political subjects, we want to keep it dispassionate and academic, stick to subject of public policy and not just be about this or that politician who are slime bags, which in my opinion, most of them are anyway, especially if you knew all the facts, because there are people research their decades of history and so on. Let's just all respect each other, and we can even and should tell each other how much we respect each other and not let what politicians do drive us apart and spoil lives. Let's not be antagonistic, just criticism in the sense of critiquing and picking things apart, deconstructing, and looking at what things matter. Things are never black and white when it comes to these subjects anyway. Reminder that Freethought is not free. Please visit our website. Lots of stuff on our website there, www.churchoffreethought.org. There are all kinds of reasons to give us your money, but here's the big one. They all come down to the fact that we're doing together what none of us can do on our own. Well, there's one other reason, that is you're going to be darned to heck if you don't contribute, and also just you're showing up here and watching videos helps as well. Helps you, helps us, helps the world. Helps to promote your values and demonstrates your commitment towards being the future that you wish to see. There will be a different future. Who thought in 1692 that there would be a different future? And thank goodness there was. So with that, we'll go to question and answer discussion.